Hello and welcome to this next module. In this module, we're going to be taking a look at the managing a stage boundary process. And if you're following along in your Prince2 manual, you'll need to be in chapter 19. As usual, any notes or annotations that you make that add value will be beneficial to you in the practitioner exam, since it's an open book exam. Don't forget as well to recap the purpose, objectives, and context of the process, which we covered at the foundation level. Now, the managing a stage boundary process can take place in a number of different situations. In other words, there's a number of different triggers for the process. But essentially, this process is designed to manage the transition from one stage to the other. So in the first set of circumstances where the process might just be triggered by the onslaught of time. In other words, we are naturally getting towards the end of a management stage. The time is appropriate to plan the next stage, and we need to start reporting on how the current stage has gone. That's the natural trigger for the managing a stage boundary process. And so the process then manages the transition or prepares enough information so that we're able to also to manage this transition from one stage to the next. And in between the two stages, obviously, a decision needs to be made by the project board for us to continue with the project. And so part of what this process is designed to do is furnish the project board with sufficient information for them to be able to make that decision. The second trigger, or the second set of circumstances where the managing a stage boundary process might occur, is when there has been an exception. So in the controlling a stage process, a project manager would have received an issue has been raised. The issue would have been captured, examined. In examining the issue, we've determined that the issue is going to cause a delay that exceeds the amount of tolerance available for the stage potentially. In which case, remember, you created an exception report, and the exception report goes up to the project board. The project board then can do a number of things, and one of the things they may do as part of the directing a project process is request an exception plan. Now, if an exception plan is requested, that would be the exceptional trigger for the managing a stage boundary process. The moment that an exception plan is requested, the managing a stage boundary process begins. Now, that won't necessarily be at the end of a stage, although it could still be at an end of a stage. It could be right at the beginning of a stage or at some point during the middle of the stage. But regardless of the point in time at which the exception plan is requested, the managing a stage boundary process is triggered. And what's essentially happening is the project board is saying, well, the stage is in exception. The deviation from the plan is such that if we continue at this rate, we're going to exceed tolerance, or it's simply not possible to continue along these lines. We need to replan. And so we abandon the existing stage plan. We draw a line in the snow. If you remember our snowball analogy, if you were with us for the foundation training, we draw a line in the snow and we say, right, let's abandon this route at this point and let's replan. And so we are replanning the stage from the point of time where the exception has occurred all the way through to the end of the stage where we ought to have been at the end of the initial plan. So those are the two sets of circumstances where this process can happen. Under the natural set of circumstances, as we tend towards the end of the stage, natural onslaught of time, or under exceptional circumstances where the board have specifically requested an exception plan, the managing a stage boundary process is designed to abandon the current stage by putting an emergency stage boundary, if you like, in place. Now, it's executed, as we said, by the project manager. The process itself is fundamental in facilitating the entire exception process because of its ability to handle or to create exception plans and submit them for approval and so on. Now, there are 5 different activities that make up the process, but only 4 of them will ever be used at any one of the occasions where it is triggered. So before we move on and have a look at the detail in the activities, we'll just have a quick overview of the process in its entirety. So you'll be looking at figure 19.1, the overview of the managing a stage boundary process in chapter 19. And here again, you can see from above, you've got the directing a project process, which is providing the exception plan request. That's the exceptional set of circumstances triggering the process. And from below, we're showing the natural trigger of the process, and that would be for the first instance at the end of the initiating a project process and at every other instance from the controlling a stage process. So the triggers are either the initiating a project process or the controlling a stage process, but both of those representing stage boundary approaching. In other words, natural end to a management stage. Nothing's gone wrong, we're simply getting to the end. So triggers at the top, exceptional, and natural triggers from the bottom. So let's follow the natural route through the process first. Following that natural route, then the first activity would be plan the next management stage. Now, obviously, one of the outputs here is the next stage plan. There are other outputs. The product descriptions will of course be created. There may be new configuration item records created. We'll get to this when we drill down on the detail here. But there's also likely to be components of the project initiation documentation that get updated at this point in time, and that's going to relate to the structure of the team, of course, because there's a new plan means new team managers and so on and so forth. So there'll be components of the PID that are updated. But with that in place, we can then update the project plan, not only with the actuals from the current stage and how things have gone, but as part of planning the next stage, there may in fact be revisions to estimates of the stage we're planning. So we're updating the project plan with actuals from what is completed and potentially revising any future forecasts to give us a better idea of how long the project is actually going to take and how much it is actually going to cost. And with that updated project plan in place, we can move through the process now and update the business case, because the business case draws its information or gets a considerable amount of information from the project plan. So we prepare the stage plan, update the project plan, and then update the business case. And with that done, we can then report the management stage end. And one of the key outputs here is obviously going to be the end stage report. Now, all of that information collectively, the stage plan, the updated project plan and updated business case, which will be part of an updated project initiation document, together with the end stage report, are submitted to the project board. So you can see the arrow goes up now to the directing a project process. That arrow is actually going into the third activity, authorize a stage or exception plan in the directing a project process. And there the project board will effectively carry out an end stage assessment, and given the information they've just been provided, decide whether or not the project should be allowed to continue to the next stage, whether there's still business justification, whether the benefits are still likely to be achieved, whether it's still likely that we can in fact complete the product. Remember, in the business case theme, we spoke about desirable, viable, and achievable. That's what the board are looking. Is it still desirable? Is the mixture right? Is the risk exposure right? Are the costs and benefits still in the right ratio? Is it still feasible that we can actually build the product? And if the product is built, will it go on to deliver the benefits? And if that is all in place, then the board will trigger the next controlling a stage process, because we know that controlling a stage process is triggered by an approved or an authorized stage plan. So that's the natural route. Fairly straightforward. Plan the next stage, update the project plan, update the business case, and report management stage end. Now, the only difference if we come in under exceptional circumstances is that instead of preparing the next stage plan or the next management stage plan, we would be producing an exception plan. Now, remember, the exception plan is only called an exception plan from the time it's requested until the time it's approved. Once it's approved, it becomes the plan. It becomes whatever plan it is designed to replace. And to that extent, remember that this exception plan could be a stage level exception plan if it's the stage tolerance that's forecast to be exceeded, or if it was the project tolerance that has been forecast to be exceeded, then this may well be a project level exception plan being produced. So that's why it doesn't say, it doesn't specify whether it's stage or project level exception. It could be be either. So regardless of what level of exception it is, we would then come in from the top here and produce an exception plan. We would still update the project plan. We would still update the business case. We would still create an end stage report, although in exceptional circumstances, Prince 2 doesn't say it's mandatory to create an end stage report under exceptional circumstances. I think if any amount of the stage has taken place, then it would be prudent. But you can imagine if you went into exception on the first day of the stage, in other words, the stage plan is approved, you trigger the first work package, the first work package comes back and say, well, the products that were supposed to be delivered can't be delivered for 6 weeks, then you're in exception on day one of the stage. It would be fruitless producing an end stage report in those circumstances. So it's not mandatory, but if any amount of money is being spent, then it's quite likely that an end stage report will need to be produced, not least because contained in the end stage report will of course be a lessons report. And lessons reporting is very important when it comes to understanding exceptions and what got us to that point in time and how we can potentially prevent them from happening again. So as an overview, that's what you're looking at: 2 potential routes through the process: the natural route from the bottom, the exceptional route coming in from the top, if you like, but essentially 5 different activities, but only 4 of them will ever happen any time this process runs. And remember that this process can run in the most ideal circumstances. The process would only run once at the end of each management stage, excluding the final management stage, because at the end of the final stage, we'd be closing the project down, not planning the next stage. So it would be once at the end of each management stage, except the final stage. Of course, it could, in certain circumstances, end up running multiple times per stage, because there may end up being multiple exceptions during a stage. That's obviously circumstantial, would depend on the circumstances at that or during that particular stage. Let's now take a look at the activities that make up the managing a stage boundary process in a little more detail. The first activity of the managing a stage boundary process is plan the next management stage. We're looking at figure 19.2 in your manual. I hope by now you're getting the grips of these activity summary diagrams. They are relatively easy to read. Of course, the stage boundary is approached, and that's what's caused the trigger of the managing a stage boundary process under natural circumstances. Of course, we know that managing a stage boundary could also happen under exceptional circumstances, but the exceptional trigger will not be to plan the next management stage. The exceptional trigger we'll see later on when we look at the alternative first activity, which we know to be creating an exception plan as opposed to just simply planning the next management stage. So in this instance, stage boundary approaching, we'll consider the project initiation documentation in particular to see if there's any change to customers' quality expectations, the acceptance criteria, the project approach, for example. Check the relevance and suitability of the approaches and controls for the stage, and of course any change in the project management team and their role descriptions in order to update the project initiation documentation. Now, so it says on the right hand side here, we'll use the existing PID and then we'll update the project initiation documentation. Because we're planning the next stage, it's likely that there'll be a change to the project management team structure, and as such, when they say here update the PID, what they really mean that the components of the PID that are most likely to need updating, which are not dealt with as a completely separate activity, are the communication management approach, because there'll be new stakeholders for the stage, new team managers, for example, therefore the project management team structure, the organogram, and of course potentially new role descriptions. So those components of the project initiation documentation that relate to the people are what they refer to in this diagram in particular. Now, of course, the business case and the project plan are also part of the project initiation documentation, but for them there is a separate standalone activity for dealing with those. So we've got the project initiation documentation being updated. Of course, we'll need to create the stage plan for the next stage. And of course, you'll recall whenever we create a stage plan or whenever we create a plan in Prince 2, we create product descriptions. We're defining the products to be delivered within the scope of that plan. And whenever we create a product description, we may need to create an associated configuration item record. So again, it says update here, but we would create or update it if it hadn't already been created. And of course, updating the logs and registers is sort of standard from this point onwards. So issue, risk and quality registers constantly updated. So in summary, plan the next management stage. Effectively, we create the stage plan, the product descriptions and the associated configuration item records, and update the communication management approach, the role descriptions, and the project management team structure, which are part of the project initiation documentation. In terms of the responsibilities for carrying out this activity, no surprise, the project manager responsible for updating the project initiation documentation, creating the stage plan, creating or updating the configuration item records, the risk register, and updating the risk register and updating the issue register. Quality register is maintained by project support, and the project manager will review any updates to the quality register. As part of planning the next stage, we'll be informing project support of the future identified dates of quality control activities and populating that quality register with the future quality controls. The next activity is update the project plan. As part of carrying out this activity, the project manager will need to check that the current stage plan is up to date with the progress. The progress to date has been captured in the existing stage plan, and revise the project plan to reflect any actuals from the current stage, as well as any revised forecasts to the next stage. Remember, we've just planned the next stage in more detail, and so there's likely to have been a revision of the estimate, because the estimate that we were using up until now would have been prepared much further away in time terms and was unlikely to have been as accurate. So now, having planned that in more detail, the project manager will be able to update the project plan from that extent. We'll also check if there's any changes to the project product description, understand the implications of any issues and risks, any new or changed tailoring requirements that may have taken place, and any additional products that will have been approved as part of any change management that may have taken place during the stage. Any changes within the PID, for example, revised project approaches, new team structure, role descriptions, and so on will be taken into account, and the project manager will need to update the issue register and risk register with any new issues or risks identified during the activity. So, as part of update the project plan, fairly straightforward. We update the project plan with actuals and revised forecasts. We update the issue register and the risk register. In terms of responsibilities for that all falls squarely on the shoulders of the project manager. Update the project plan, done by the project manager, reviewed by assurance, approved by the board. Updating of the issue and risk registers, both the responsibility of the project manager. Now that we've got a nicely updated project plan, we can use the information in the updated project plan to carry out the next activity, which is to update the business case. Let's have a look at that one. So we're looking at figure 19.4. So on the left-hand side of this diagram here, you see the project plan. Now this is the project plan that we've just updated, and we use the information in the updated project plan to update the business case. Of course, the benefits management approach may well have been updated as well, and that will necessarily need to be done whenever we update the business case. If there's any change to prescribed benefits, then we would reflect that any changes to the potential benefits or any changes to the activities required to measure the expected benefits in the benefits management approach. Of course, your issue and risk register as well will need to be updated. So update the business case. Essentially, we consider the updated project plan and the current risk exposure, details of any issues as well, any changes to the benefits management approach as a result, in order to update the business case and update the benefits management approach. In terms of responsibilities, the project manager is responsible for all of this. The project manager updates the business case, updates the benefits management approach. All of that is approved by the project board following a review by project assurance and corporate program management or the customer. And finally, the project manager will update both the risk register and the issue register. So that gets us to a point in the stage where we are ready to create the end stage report. And the activity that is responsible for this is called report management stage end. We're looking at figure 19.5 now, the activity summary for this particular activity. And again, you'll see that the existing business case, the communication management approach is an important input here again, because this report will be sent to potentially to other interested stakeholders, not only to the project management board, and that information will be contained in the communication management approach. We've got the benefits management approach, the registers and logs, issue register, daily register, quality register, the lessons log. We've got the stage plan for the current stage, which will have defined all of the work that needed to be completed, and we'll get a product status account to show that all of the products have in fact been completed, and provide that as information in order to create the end stage report. We'll look at this later in the module, but an end stage report will contain, or may contain if appropriate, a lessons report. So any lessons learned during the stage, we'll have a lessons report created for them, defining the lesson, what was learnt, and so on, and that will be contained within the end stage report. Alongside that, we'll find what we call the follow-on action recommendations. Now, these relate to outstanding issues, outstanding risks, items of work not yet complete, but nothing significant enough to not complete the stage or to prevent the stage from coming to an end. And advice will be sought by populating or by containing these within the end stage report. We're effectively seeking advice from the project board as to who should be notified of each of these recommendations. Now, in terms of the information being considered here, again, it's a fairly open book. Obviously, the existing business case is considered. The benefits management approach will need to be considered. The risk register, issue register, quality register, lessons log for those lessons reports, the current stage plan in terms of what was supposed to be achieved, the product status account showing that what was supposed to be achieved has in fact been completed, that all the products are now listed as complete. And importantly here, the communication management approach. Remember that the end stage report will be sent primarily to the project board, but there may also be some other interested parties who need to receive that communication, and that detail will be contained within the communication management approach. So the project manager will need to review that in order to make sure that this event-driven progress control, the end stage report, finds its way to the appropriate set of stakeholders. In terms of the responsibilities for carrying this out, the end stage report is created by the project manager, as is the lessons report, which forms part of the end stage report, as is the follow-on action recommendations, all of which will be reviewed by project assurance, and ultimately, as part of the directing a project process when authorizing the next stage plan, the end stage report for this stage will be approved by the project board. Now that brings us to the final activity of the chapter, although this isn't necessarily the final activity of the process. Remember, the managing a stage boundary process can be triggered under two different sets of circumstances. Under natural circumstances, the first activity was to prepare the next management stage plan. In exceptional circumstances, the first activity of the process will be to prepare an exception plan. And there's, largely speaking, very little difference between the two activities in terms of the actions. The only difference being, or the primary difference being, that an exception plan could be prepared not always only to stage level, but it may be prepared to project level if the extent of the exception is a forecast breach of some project level tolerance. So you have to consider that the type of plan being created when an exception plan is requested will depend on the extent of the exception itself. Let's have a look at this activity then in some more detail. Figure 19.6 shows very similar to preparing a stage plan. Of course, now you see the exception plan request as the trigger for this activity. This is the exceptional trigger for the process. Of course, again, we take the current stage plan into account. We take the exception report into account, the issue register, the risk register, the project initiation documentation. There might be an update to, again, the team structure as a result of the exception plan, to team managers. We might be finding an alternative supplier. There's a whole plethora of possibilities that become sort of that fall within range as a result of dealing with an exception. So, and again, if you compare this right-hand side of this diagram to the right-hand side of the first activity to prepare a stage plan, you'll notice that, really speaking, the only difference is that we're preparing an exception plan, or creating an exception plan, and update issue register has been moved from the bottom of the list to the top. In other words, it's gained a little higher priority in the list here, simply because if we are preparing an exception plan, I can guarantee you there is an issue and we are dealing with it. And so we'd need to sort of update the issue register alongside that. So still produce the exception plan, potentially produce product descriptions, potentially create or update configuration item records. Alongside that, we're updating components of the PID that may require it: team structure, organogram, and communication management approach. Okay, so that was a more in-depth look at the activities that make up the managing a stage boundary process. Again, a number of management products seen throughout this process. Obviously, we've got our end stage report. Potentially, it may include a lessons report. And of course, we've got our stage plan, along with product descriptions, configuration, item records, and so on. The rest of the management products were not created, they were simply updated. So we have got an updated PID, updated communication management approach, updated role descriptions, updated team structure, updated project plan, updated business case. But let's take some time now to look in a little more detail at the end stage report. Now, the lessons report we'll consider when we look at the closing a project process, because it's during the closing a project process that a lessons report is mandatory. It's not really mandatory until then. So we'll look at the lessons report then. The plan we'll consider when we look at the plan's theme. Product descriptions we'll consider as part of the quality theme, and the configuration item record as part of the change theme. So the managing a stage boundary process, predominantly the end stage report and the next stage plan. Let's look at the end stage report. You'll be going to Appendix A, and we're looking at entry number 9. So the end stage report, of course, the purpose is to provide a summary of progress of the project to date to the project board and other interested stakeholders. This report is created by the project manager. Typical composition of an end stage report will be the project manager's report, which summarizes management stage performance to date or for the stage. Then there'll be a review of the business case, summarizing the validity of the project's business case, including any benefits achieved so far. That would obviously be as part of a phased handover or a phased release of project's products that have already started to deliver benefits. Any residual benefits, expected net benefits, deviations from the approved business case, and an overview of the project's aggregate risk exposure. A review of project objectives is a review of how the project has performed to date against its planned targets, and these are time, cost, quality, scope, benefit, and risk. That'll be against the planned targets, and of course any tolerances for those, and a review of the project's approaches and controls, or the effectiveness of those. There'll be a review of the stage objectives, the management stage objectives. This is how the specific stage has performed against its planned targets and tolerances, again, for time, cost, quality, scope, benefit, and risk. Then there'll be a review of team performance, in particular providing recognition for good performance, a review of the products, including any quality records, approval records, off specifications, a phased handover if there has been anything, a summary of any follow-on action recommendations. In other words, the request for project board advice as to who should receive each recommended action, and those relate to, as we said in the process, unfinished work, ongoing issues, risks, and other activities required to take this project to the next phase of its life. Then we'll include detail on any lessons, if appropriate, a review of what went well during the stage, what went badly, how we can improve going forward, details of any issues and risks, a summary of the current set of issues and risks affecting the project, and then finally the forecast, the project manager's forecast for the project and the next management stage against planned targets and tolerances for time, cost, quality, scope, benefit, and risk. Now, when the end stage report is produced at the end of the initiation stage, it's likely to be quite reduced in content, because a lot of the content of the end stage report relates to specialist products, and obviously at the end of the initiation stage, will there be no specialist products produced. So that pretty much summarizes the end stage report. Remember, it's produced by the project manager during the managing a stage boundary once at the end of each stage. Where the managing a stage boundary is triggered under exceptional circumstances, in other words, by the project board requesting an exception plan, the end stage report may not be required. Now, if any amount of the stage had been executed, I would certainly suggest that one is produced. But if the exception has come really early in the stage, as I mentioned, then it may not necessarily be required. The balance of the products in the managing a stage boundary process, the stage plan, as I said, we'll look at what we looked at when we covered plans, as with the lessons report and product descriptions were in quality and so on. So that pretty much wraps it up then for the products relating to the managing a stage boundary process. Let's move on now and look at how the managing a stage boundary process can be tailored to take into consideration different project structures and different contexts that may exist. In general terms, of course, like many of the other processes, the activities of the managing a stage boundary process may be split, combined, or even run concurrently. Again, when tailoring involves a change to any of the structure of the process, extreme care should be taken to ensure that the integrity of the interfaces with other processes is maintained. Taking, for example, a part of the plan the next stage activity, the updating of the communication management approach, the role descriptions, team structure, for example, from that activity, and combining it into a single activity along with the activity to update the project plan and the activity to update the business case as a single activity, which could simply be to update all aspects of the project initiation documentation, is an example of combining activities sort of in that regard. The process can also be triggered earlier on in the management stage and then only completed much later on. And so to that extent, may actually be in execution alongside the controlling a stage process for much of the stage. And this is particularly likely to be true when there are protracted procurement processes which exist, where there may be quite detailed planning required and the appointment of a supplier much further in advance is necessary, sort of out of the ordinary. Now, the managing a stage boundary process also facilitates management by exception, and to that extent may be split, if necessary, into two separate processes. One that would deal with exceptions and one that deals with the standard stage end activities. Where a project is comprised of a single management stage, then an exception-related version is all that will be required, since the stage plan for the first stage will in fact be the project plan, or may be included at least within the project plan, since there is only one stage. The project plan will then obviously be prepared to an appropriate level of detail, and an end stage report for the initiation stage could be produced as part of the initiating a project process by adding an activity. Documents-wise, we know already that plans can take any format from formally documented plans, including Gantt charts, product breakdown structures, product flow diagrams, and so on, to much less formally presented plans, even being held partially or totally within some type of planning tool. Now, this would apply to the stage plan or any exception plan delivered by this process. Product descriptions, which we know to be included in the plans, again, may vary widely in their format and may be pre-existing product specifications from off-the-shelf products which are going to be delivered by an external supplier. So, for example, if we're building a house and we're installing the windows, then the supplier who's installing the windows, the company from whom we buy the windows, provides ultimately a quote. And that quote would include the specification of the product. This would include the color of the window frame, the type of the frame, the details of the type of glass, the energy rating, and so on and so forth. And obviously, in that case, then the specification is the product description. So it's not the project manager creating the product descriptions, but rather they're being produced by the team managers, because they have the required specialist skills to define them. The end stage report as well could also include any relevant lessons related information sourced from both the lessons log and any associated or relevant lessons reports. Now, if there is only one management stage, then the end stage report would not be produced, since the end project report, which comes from the closing a project process, would of course include any relevant details from the stage. With regards to the roles executing the process, the project manager is primarily responsible for the creation of all of the management products during the process. But equally, this responsibility could be delegated to any appropriate resource, as long as the accountability remains with the project manager. So that then brings us to the end of this look at the managing stage boundary process. Don't forget, anyway, to complete the relevant questions from sample paper 1 in the resources area. And again, remember, if it's been a long time since you last used this training application, then you may want to reread the scenario before you do the questions, just to refresh your memory. And don't forget those video rationales that will take you through the answers and the thinking behind the questions and may provide additional learning points. Once you've completed those, then come back and join me in the next module.